All right. Thanks, Caitlin. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first in a couple of GP 2018 R2 updates that we're doing. Um, this product was just released a few weeks ago, so this is brand new stuff. And we're going to go through a few slides where I've got pretty much the entire feature set for GP 2018, and then we're going to go look at some of those live actually in the software. All right, so the first thing I thought we would cover is the actual roadmap so that we can talk about kind of where 2018 R2 fits in the grand scheme of Dynamics GP. So you see the fourth pillar over from the left, 2018 R2 brought in a lot of new features, a lot of things requested by end users, and some things that Microsoft kind of snuck in there that you'll get a look at as well. And so we're expecting another kind of major release about a year from now, so October timeframe of 2019, and then probably October, November timeframe of 2020, we'll have another kind of major release. And so those, of course, are still on the drawing board, and we'll know more about what the direction is probably next summer for the 2019 release. So if you're on GP20, if you're going to run GP 2018 R2, I did put up the system requirements here. And so this is the exact same as 2018. So R2 did not change anything from GP 2018. And so your computer that you work on every day, the workstation, must be Windows 7 or later. So something that's fairly current, which I think most everybody probably is on now. The Microsoft Office products that work the best with 2018 and 2018 R2 are Microsoft Office 2013, Microsoft Office 2016, Office 365, which doesn't really have a version anymore. So if you are running Office 365, that's always okay because that's in constant update mode from Microsoft. And so if you have Office loaded on your computer, you want 2013 or 16 or Office 365. To create PDF documents and work the best with the PDF capabilities in Dynamics GP, Adobe X or Adobe 10 is really the supported version. That doesn't mean it won't work with some of the free ones out there, and there's a bunch of free PDF creators out there. You might find some things that don't work exactly right, and so Microsoft will always point us back to, well, Adobe is the supported platform, and so I usually tell people try the free ones because they're free, and if you get stuck, well, then you probably have to license Adobe, but start with free. We do support everything in a virtualized environment, of course. Microsoft calls out the fact that they only support their own virtualized systems, so Hyper-V, but if you run GP in a virtualized environment, you probably don't run Hyper-V, but it runs on VMware and pretty much any virtual server system out there. But again, if there's issues, Microsoft will say, well, unless you're on Hyper-V, it's not technically supported. Doesn't mean it doesn't work. They just only test their own products, of course. Okay, 2018 and 2018 R2 actually will cause you a SQL update. And so GP 2018 family of products only runs on SQL 2014, 16, or 17. If you're on an older version of GP, so prior to GP 2018, you might have SQL 2008 or maybe SQL 2012. And so you will probably have to look at upgrading your SQL software if you move to GP 2018 or the R2 release. Okay, so how do we get there? Well, if you're on GP 2015 and you have the 2015 US year-end update installed or something more current, so in other words, GP 2015 version would be 14.00.0898 or later, then you're okay. If you're on GP 2016, and that would mean 16.00.0439 or later, then you can go easily enough. If you're on GP 2013 or something earlier than that, you can't go direct to 2018 or 18R2, but of course you can go from whatever version you are on to something else, to maybe something else, and then to 2018, depending on how old you are on GP. But if you're on 2013, you do have to make a stop to 2015 or 16 first, and then on to 18. So stuff we do all day, every day, not difficult, certainly not impossible. So it's just not a direct upgrade. It's you got to make one extra stop or a little hop in the middle there to get to 2018, but certainly stuff that is easily done. Okay, so what features do we have in 2018 R2? The first list here are the most common things that were requested by existing customers, and so Microsoft did add these things in. The first thing is they are hiding, optionally hiding the Business Analyzer in the navigation list. And so Business Analyzer probably was not used by a lot of folks, and I know we don't have a ton of people that used it, but it can be shut off, and so they put that feature in there as well to kind of systematically turn it off for everybody in the system, just so they don't see it and wonder what it is if it's not deployed. Kind of a big one is the second thing here, increasing the password length from 15 to 21. And so that's SQL Server now will take a 21 character password. And so GP has been extended to kind of mirror the SQL Server password length. And of course, if you're using passwords and you want to have a notification come out to the users that their password's going to expire, they've added that functionality. The ability to expire passwords and kind of enforce the password rules from the server side of things has been in the system for many years, but there wasn't really a prompt to remind the user to go change their password, and so sometimes it was a little bit clunky to keep up with where things were. And so if you do enforce the password rules coming from the server side of the house, Dynamics GP will pop up a nice reminder here about 7 days before your password is going to expire that you need to deal with that. Smart List Designer favorites can now be displayed in the navigation list, and that's one that we'll actually take a look at. We can mass update to inactive within the navigation list as well. And so if we had a group of customers or vendors or items that we wanted to inactivate or reactivate or flag as temporary if it's vendors, we have the ability to do that kind of in mass instead of one by one. And then there's something new called monthly recurring batches, and the monthly recurring batches, which, well, that fact is not new, but we can do some things with that as far as posting, which we'll see here in a couple of seconds on a monthly or bi-monthly recurring batch. And so let's take a look at some of these. So here's the password setup. Nothing huge here. It's just the field is now longer. Well, the keyable length of the field is longer, and so you'll see we can get now up to the full 21 characters that SQL Server is storing on the SQL side. We'll be able to use inside of Dynamics GP. And here's the little message that pops up. So if you are using the password rules in GP, you'll have the little window that pops that says, hey, in about 7 days here, you're going to have to change your password or it's going to expire. And so it gives you that ability to deal with that before it does, in fact, expire. So that's kind of a nice little feature. And you'll see kind of on the screen right in here the password enforcement, and so that's what pops that message up. Of course, if you're not enforcing passwords and the rules and changes and so on, then there's no message to pop up. You might have the same password since 1985, and that's okay. I did put this screen up just as a reminder. This came, I think, in GP 2016, maybe R2, this summary button that's on the user setup. And so if you're more on the system admin side or kind of the power user side, you'll have access to the user setup window. But there is a summary button, and this was kind of snuck in there, and nobody made too big of a deal out of it, but it's kind of a nice window that opens up there on the left side of the screen where you can see a summary of the users, and you can see how many licenses that you own for full users, limited users, and then employee self-service users. And you can see the users that you have in your system and the type of license that they actually have access to. And so in my sample system here that's running on my laptop, I have DynSA, of course, which defaults in, and then the SQL SA user, and I only have the two, and they're both flagged as full users. And so that's kind of a nice little feature for the system admin folks. Okay, so monthly recurring batches, nothing new about that. That's been there for as long as I can remember. But the new feature is if we have a monthly recurring batch or bi-monthly recurring batch for receivables, payables, or inventory, the highlighted part of the screen here where I've got the, okay, not sure what I did there, but sorry about that. All right, there it is. Okay, so I'm not going to play with the mouse. You'll see the orange highlight there on the Dynamics window where there's a new checkbox to use the last day of the month. And so what this does is if you have a monthly or bi-monthly recurring batch, the system will automatically, if you check the box, will automatically create the posting date as the last day of the month for those recurring batches. And so why did they do that? Well, apparently that bothered some users when you have February that is never going to have 30 or 31 days, and you have April with 30 days, and then May with 31 days. And so in this example, this is actually an April 30th batch. Well, what would happen is in May, it would post on May 30th as well, and that wasn't wrong necessarily, but sometimes people want these recurring things to post exactly on the last day of the month, and so checking this box would allow you to do that, and so it'll keep track of what the last day of the month is and set the posting date properly. Okay, the Business Analyzer is set up under the System Preferences now. So way down at the bottom there, you see the ability to either display the Business Analyzer on the home page or the navigation list pages or not. And so on checking the box, we'll disable that system-wide, all users in the particular area that you want to turn it off from. And so if you don't know what Business Analyzer is, and that's a foreign topic, it's been out there for several versions. When we flip over to live software here, I'll maybe point that out so you can see, because I do have that actually turned on my home page. Okay, so moving on into the sales features that have been added in GP 2018 R2. We can do some things now with the functional currency in the sales order processing navigation list. And so the ability to print the invoice in the functional currency from the navigation has been added. A nice one, I think, is the sales workflow. If we use that, now includes the credit limit, and so we can take action based on the customer's credit limit in the workflow. And so that field was not available in the workflow, and that's kind of an important field when it comes to customers and sales. And so we can use that now to direct workflow and to trigger things that we might want to happen with the workflow rules. Microsoft created a new smart list for deposits where there's not a posted invoice, basically. And so in other words, you've taken money from a customer and you haven't posted an invoice, and so you can run a quick smart list to go see that. If you do that a lot, you may have built with Smart List Builder or Smart List Designer, you may have built your own, but there is one out of the box now that you can see if you have people's money, but you haven't actually shipped product or posted the invoice yet. So you still have a deposit liability basically back to the customer. You can print and email a sales order document now at the same time. The printing obviously is not new. The emailing's been in there for several versions, but now you can do them simultaneously, so you don't have to pick kind of a one or the other thing. We have some additional sort options in sales order processing item inquiry, and so that one I'll show you what that screen looks like. So that's why that's in blue. In 2018, not R2, but just core 2018, Microsoft added the ability to email a customer statement from the customer maintenance window. And so if you do run statements and you go into routines, even if you want to run a single customer statement in the routine that does that, it's still quite a few clicks to actually get that to happen. Not difficult, just kind of time consuming. And so now the idea was if they just put that functionality on the customer card, we can run the statement from the customer card for that customer. So we wouldn't do that if we were going to run a bunch, but we'd still use the routine. But if we're just going to run one or two for a couple of different customers, this might be a more efficient way to actually do that. And then the last thing is if you've ever used the customer combiner tool that's part of the professional services tools library, and you combine customers, you know that the ship to addresses for the customer you're combining away from, you're combining into, you get their ship to addresses. Well, sometimes the customer that's going to go away, you want to retain those ship to addresses. And so in 2018 R2, we have the ability as an option to retain the ship to addresses for the customer that's being combined. And so that's kind of clearly came from users that struggled with this. And so, all right, so let's take a look at what some of these look like. And so here's kind of the workflow maintenance window where we have credit limit access now. And so we could create in this example a workflow where the customer has exceeded their credit limit and we want to send this off to the sales manager or general manager or CFO or whatever it might be to take some action and be more proactive when a customer is over their limit. Sometimes you could do this, I guess, where the customer is getting close to their credit limit. So you could probably test to see if you're within, a few dollars, maybe a few $1,000s of the established customer credit limit, and then trigger a workflow to to have somebody look at that and be proactive until the customer wants to buy something, and your salesperson has to say, sorry, you can't. So we don't ever want to do that for the most part. Here's that smart list for customers that we've taken money, but we haven't actually shipped product, or assuming that we haven't shipped based on no posted invoice in the system. And so this would easily let you reconcile those customer deposits if you do that type of thing. Here's the item inquiry, and so I'll show you this one live, kind of where that is, so I won't spend too much time on that. If you use sales order processing, the screen will look very familiar. So this is the feature that actually allows us to print and email simultaneously an ESOP document that we have here. So in this case, I'm doing the blank invoice form, but that is a nice feature if you're in sales order processing. And so let's pause for a minute and we'll slide my Dynamics GP over to this shared window. And so this is 2018 R2, so it looks pretty much like 2018 and 2016 and so forth. So the sales, let me travel over to the sales page here. The sales item inquiry is really going to be this item right here. So when we're in the inquiry part of the sales system, or if you navigate the traditional way off the menus, it'll be inquiry, sales, and sales items. And so it's this window that actually has these additional sorts. Now you might remember if you've looked at 2018, core 2018, a lot of sorts were added to a lot of the lookup or the inquiry windows. This one, they either didn't get time for or hadn't thought of. And so the additional sorting features we see now have been added. And so this sort by did not exist prior to R2. And so made it kind of clunky, especially if you have tons and tons of history, made it kind of hard to find certain transactions. And so now we can look for things that might be within a particular date and sort that ascending or descending, and that really helps kind of the window to get to the data that you really need. And so that's the feature on sales item inquiry. Since we're in sales, let me just bring up the customer card here, and I'll show you the statement feature. And so a traditional customer card, if I pop in a customer, we have now the ability to, under the print button, to select the statement. We can select the form that we're actually using and then print that. And that's a lot faster than going through the routine and restricting it to a certain customer and so forth. And so the feeling was this was much more efficient if we just need one. And then of course from here, you have the ability to send that out through email there if you need to. So that's what that feature looks like. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about purchasing here. And GP's getting in the way. There we go. And so here we have the, you don't have it. There, it's working. Okay. The purchasing side of things. And so some nice features here as well. The first one up there is one that I don't think we see a ton of, but when we do see it, it is problematic for folks. So this one happens to come in when you make you're trying to do a purchase order from a purchase requisition, and so if you don't use the PO requisition system in GP, then this won't apply to you really, but the way it is today is if you have a purchase requisition and then that gets through the workflow approvals, comes down time to cut the purchase order, well, people were wanting to not buy everything that was approved. They might want to spread that out or just not want to buy it even though it was approved. Purchasing might, put the brakes on some of that stuff. And so the way it is today, it was kind of an all or nothing. So you kind of had to purchase everything that was on the approved purchase requisition. Well, in R2, that doesn't have to be the case. And so you can actually make partial buys of what was approved. Of course, you couldn't go over, but you can do something less. And so that's, if any folks use that functionality in the system, that probably should light up a little bit. If you don't use that, then that's okay. But that was kind of a nuisance for a lot of folks. Second one on the list, the first blue one there that we'll actually take a look at, is the vendor document has been added to the payables all in one view. And so I'll point that out and what that is and why that's important. If you put a vendor on hold, that vendor hold status is now displayed much like it is on a customer, where we can see the little red stop sign. And so we'll look at a couple of those. When we have an inactive checkbook, and anytime you have a list that you're looking up checkbooks, the inactives can be dropped off. And of course, we've been able to do that with customers and vendors and items. And if we had GL accounts, employees, those master records that are marked inactive can optionally be excluded from the lookup list. Well, they got around to doing that same thing in the checkbooks, and checkbooks is a little less intrusive, I guess, because most people don't have thousands of checkbooks like they might have customers or vendors, but still it's good to be consistent throughout the system, and so they've added that in there for us as well. If you use purchase orders, so nothing to do with requisitions at this point, but just the core Dynamics GP PO, and you want to email those, you probably know right now you have one option. You can email the PO blank form. In R2, they've added the ability to email the PO other form as well. And so I'll kind of show you what that new screen looks like. And kind of the bottom one there, a big thing, but a simple thing, I guess, is they now allow the checkbook ID to default into a payment batch or a check batch. And so for all these years, whenever we've gone to write checks in AP, we had to always pop the checkbook in there into the batch window. And so it will now default that in from our payable setup. And so I'll kind of show you what that looks like. But if you're the person that does AP checks, you'll know exactly what we're talking about here. So, okay, so let's see what we have here that are in the slides. So here's the partial purchase from the PO requisition. And so you'll notice here that we might have an approval in this example for 100. So you see the quantity that was approved, and I cannot put my mouse over on that window. So there we go. All right, so I've got it in red on the dynamic screen there. You'll see the quantity that was approved from the requisition was 100. However, we're only going to purchase 90. And so what happens then is we are, number one, able to do that. And then number two, the purchasing person would get a message saying that the remaining quantity, in this case of 10, is going to be canceled. It doesn't just leave it out there hanging, so it has to get rid of it. So that's what that new feature looks like. This one I'll show you on the software. So here, the vendor hold status. This little stop sign is now populated on any vendor inquiry window. So obviously the vendor inquiry, which you see up there. When we look at transactions inquiry by vendor, if we look at the purchasing all-in-one view, or the payables transaction entry, if we zoom back to the vendors, we'll see that little red stop sign if the vendor master has been set to hold. And so that's kind of a nice little thing to have available. All right, so let's flip back over to Dynamics GP, and I'll toggle over to the purchasing section here. And so the first thing that we'll take a look at is the payables purchasing all-in-one view. And so I'll find the vendor that's on hold, and I think I think this guy's on hold. Yep, so here's an example of this vendor being on hold back. If we drill back to the vendor maintenance here, you'll see I've got it marked to be on hold. And so any inquiry window that shows the vendors will show that this vendor's on hold if selected. And so let me go to one that has a little bit more information here. And so so this particular advanced office systems, if you're not using this window, by the way, to look at your vendor data, if you're still using the old style window, I would strongly encourage you to start using this all-in-one view. So you'll fall in love with it in maybe 2 to 3 minutes, tops. And so what wasn't here was our actual document number. So in other words, under my payment column, my document number here is my check, of course. My invoice column, my document number is the invoice, the vendor's invoice. And so those didn't exist prior to R2. They relied more on the voucher number. And so the big, long, in my demo system here, the blue underline number. And that's okay, but most of us don't generally go by the system number, the internal number. Most of us refer to things by the vendor invoice or our check number in this example that I've opened here. And so it was really kind of like 99.9% done. And when they added the document number to display out here on the all-in-one view window, then that really kind of got us 100% here. And so here, like a credit, we've got our credit memo number instead of just the voucher number. And so that's the feature that's been added there. So, okay, continuing on with purchasing, if we go over to the purchase order entry here. And so I'll just pop one up, and if we click on the email button, this is the feature. Right now, this prior to R2, we didn't have the purchase order format option. It just was hard-coded to email the PO blank form. Well, now, just like when you print, you can print the other form, and so we can email that out as well. And so that's kind of nice. They really need a few more in there, but we only have 2, but now we have full capability of emailing both of those. And then I think the last thing here in kind of the purchasing section is when we write checks. And so we'll just go to edit check batch, but any place that we would enter a check batch ID or a payment batch ID is what it's called now. So when I click on this to create a new batch, you'll notice that the checkbook is populated in there for me. And so if you're not on 2018 R2, that field would be blank, and you would have to select the checkbook when you create your payment batch. And so that was kind of a handy little thing. It's defaulting in again from my accounts payable set up, and so whatever my default checkbook is what is rolled into the batch. And of course, if that's not the checkbook that you're going to use this time, you can pick anything else that you have access to, but it's just one less thing that we have to click when we're working in the system. Okay, so let's go back to see what we have in financial now. All right, so financial enhancements. The first one is a pretty big one if you work with inventory, the historical inventory trial balance. Optionally now will allow you to exclude zero quantities or zero values. So today, if you run that, you might get many dozens or maybe even hundreds of pages of items that you don't want because they don't have any quantity or value. Well, they've allowed us to, with a checkbox, to toggle those off. In fact, they are toggled off by default. And so if you want zero quantity or zero value items, you can turn those on, and I'll show you what that looks like on the screen here in a second. The first blue one, the second item on the list here in financials, to me is a pretty big item. This is a major change, I think, to the performance of the software and how it, not the speed, but how it reacts to our desires here. We can now post from subledgers over to the general ledger without creating a batch. And you might say, well, we're doing that now. Well, you are, but the rule today is if you post in a batch in the subledger, you could actually then update the general ledger automatically. You could post through the general ledger without stopping and creating a batch in the general ledger. But what you can't do in the subledger, any subledger, is transaction level post the subledger. That forces you today into a batch in the general ledger. So there's no way around that. And a lot of folks want to, they want a transaction level post in the subledger, which means you're clicking the post button on the transaction entry window. So think about entering a payables voucher. You don't want to use a batch. You've just got one or two things. You just want to put them in and post them. Well, if you don't use a batch today, that forces the batch to be created at the general ledger side, and you have to then go post that batch. Well, with 18R2, they've optionally give us the ability to continue to transaction level post through this at the general, or I'm sorry, at the subledger, and also post the general ledger at the same time, and so without creating the GL batch. And so that's a fundamental change to how posting works. We talked about the monthly and bi-monthly recurring batches already, so that's really what that feature is. The fourth one down, the ability to disable duplicate check numbers, and you might be thinking, well, we've got that now today too. Well, you do, but it doesn't work today if you do a miscellaneous check, a payroll check, or a bank reconciliation transaction. So just a pure banking transaction. It doesn't look for the duplicate flags. And so this feature now extends the disabling of the duplicate check numbers into really any place you can write a check. So payroll, banking, or the miscellaneous check feature, which a lot of people don't use. But so it's virtually throughout the system now. Nice feature there if you're audited. The auditors will like that. A couple of things in payroll. Kind of a big thing was the payroll check register now actually has the FICA totals on it, and so I'll show you what that looks like. And yes, you could have done that in Report Writer, but why? That should be an out-of-the-box thing, and today it is. And also there's some laws that require the shared maximum calculations for benefits and deductions. So for example, 401k, if your company participates in a 401k plan, there are some requirements around the shared maximum amounts for benefits and deductions. And so payroll will handle that now in our R2. A pay code now can have a start and an end date. And I'll show you what that looks like in the system as well. And so that allows you to go put pay codes on people that maybe you're not quite ready to use, or they're going to be maybe more temporary. You're going to pay them under a certain pay code, and then you don't want that pay code to be able to be used after a certain date. And so we can do that now. And if you're using the web client, the letter writing assistant option is in there now. Probably not a big thing for most people on the meeting here. Okay, so here's the historical inventory trial balance, and those are the check boxes that have been added if you want to include. So as I said, it's turned off by default, but if you desire to include items with zero quantity, check the box. And or items with zero value, check that box, and then those will populate on the report, which is what you're getting now. So by default, it will exclude those off. Duplicate check numbers, again, nothing new on the window here. So this is our checkbook maintenance window. Nothing to do here. It's just that the system now will consider this checkbox down at the bottom right there where it says override check numbers or duplicate check numbers. If you check the box, that'll allow the duplicates with the box unchecked like you see on mine. It won't allow a duplicate check number. It just adds that functionality to the bank transaction entry, payroll, manual checks, and miscellaneous checks. And so prior to this feature, it was, again, just limited to accounts payable for the most part. Here's where we can exclude the inactive checkbooks. Just anytime you're doing a lookup on the actual checkbook master records themselves, you have the ability to parse out those that are marked inactive. So nice little handy thing there. The mass update feature in the navigation list, and so this allows us to multi-select the records kind of down in the scrolling part of the window below, and then take action on those, specifically marking customers, items, vendors inactive, or reactivating those that might have been inactive. Same with employees as well, and so and checkbooks, by the way. So but you have tons of checkbooks. So it's just a little faster way. If you have a group of customers or vendors you want to go through and make inactive, it's a faster way to do it than having to do it one at a time at the card. And so here's that payroll deduction benefit shared limit setup. And so you'll see here that this window has been altered to include the calendar year maximum for a particular deduction or benefit. And of course, when you're writing payroll checks during the check processing part of the system, that year-to-date amount is tested to see if there's a problem there. And so that's what that new feature looks like in payroll. Here's a somewhat of a bad picture on the payroll register. So this is the check register, and the FICA has been totaled up here. And so, and yes, you could do this with Report Writer, and maybe we've done that or you've done that, but it does then create a modified report that maybe otherwise you didn't need, and maybe has to be updated or tweaked a little as you upgrade your GP system. But this is a factory edition now, so we'll be able to be added to that report without you doing anything. Okay, so let's bounce back to Dynamics GP, and I want to look at the posting setup here first. And so I'm going to navigate here to my posting setup, and so we'll just grab any subledger series. Doesn't matter what it is. Let's go into sales transaction entry just for this example. So it doesn't matter where it's coming from. And so what you'll see here is what you would have today. You have the option to post to the general ledger, meaning create a GL batch every time, or post through the general ledger, which is fine as long as you're batching, in this case, sales transaction entry. And most of the time you are, but again, there are times that you maybe don't want to go to the trouble of creating a batch in the subledger, but you didn't have that option if you wanted to post all the way through the GL side. So what's been added is this checkbox right here, where we say we're going to allow transaction posting in the subledger, but in so doing, we're still going to post through the general ledger. And so that's the new feature, is this checkbox right here. And you'll see that on every subledger that creates a GL entry has this option now. And so that's, I think, a fundamental change to the system for the good. All right, so we'll show you the pay code piece. And so we'll just flip over to payroll here and just grab someone. And when I navigate into my pay code, you'll notice now that we have a start date and an end date for this particular pay code. And so these are the two fields that have been added. And if you're doing payroll, when you run the check build, well, let me say it this way: any checks built before or after these dates, if we put them in there, will exclude this code. And so if you've got a pay code that goes into effect next week, you've already put on a person, and you do a check run this week, well, if your start date is next Monday, you wouldn't be able to use that pay code this week. And so that's really adds some kind of security and flexibility, I guess, to the pay code setup. So any checks built before or after these two dates, again, exclude this pay code. All right. And so the other thing is, let me flip back to purchasing here. We'll go into the navigation list, but before I do, there is another feature that the Smart List favorites have actually been added to the navigation. And so you'll notice the navigation over here, which a lot of people don't use, but maybe should. You know, you can travel from the purchasing, which is kind of everything on the page here. You can travel into Excel reports if you've deployed those, and you have the ability to see a couple hundred Excel reports that Microsoft has built, or maybe you've built, and you want to report on your GP data with Excel. You have your SQL Server reports. If you're using any SSRS reports, those would populate here as well. Well, in 2018 R2, we have our Smart List favorites that we've created for this module, so for purchasing, that show up on the list here. And so, and of course, when I say favorites we've created, those are the Microsoft favorites as well, which you'll see with the asterisk here. But any Smart List that has to do with purchasing is available. And so this is a nice feature because you don't even have to go to the Smart List and open it now to run it. You can run your Smart List from within the navigation pane here for any module or any part of the system that you have Smart List in. And so that's kind of what that looks like. If you did want to take action against a group of master records, so vendors, customers, items, employees, and so forth, this would allow you to do this also in the navigation. And so here's a list of my vendors. If I tick these off, this is the feature where I can inactivate these vendors, or I can activate vendors that are have been inactive. I can reactivate those, or I have the ability to mark these as temporary vendors. And so if you're not using this navigation list to kind of drive around through the system, you might force yourself to take a few minutes someday just to kind of dig around in there. It has some really nice features. If you're still kind of doing it the old way, those habits are hard to adjust, I know, but these navigation lists are really very powerful. And so, and you actually see my business analyzer here running alongside of these lists. And so if I flip back to my home page, you'll notice that The business analyzer is I do have turned on in my system, and I do have some of the 200 charts and graphs plugged into my homepage here. And so that's what Business Analyzer is a collection of a couple of hundred SQL Server reporting services reports. And so this gives us the ability now to turn this off in mass, but it is kind of a nice feature, and if you do have use of these, you own these. The other thing I want to point out kind of as we start to wrap up here is I have Power BI also running in my Dynamics GP, and Microsoft has 4 what they call content packs available for you for free. One is financial based, one is sales based, one is purchasing based, and one is inventory based. And so if you are brand new to Power BI and want to take a look at that, let us know, give us a call. There's a free version, which is what I'm running, but you probably need the paid version, because if you want to share these reports, or in this case the dashboards that you create, if you want other people to actually access those, then you have to have the paid version, and the paid version is $9.99 a month per user. And so not an overly expensive tool, but very powerful. It's kind of a newer way to do reporting out of our Dynamics data, and Microsoft does have some dashboards here that we could plug in and hook to our own data if we like. And so that's not a 2018 R2 feature, but was enabled here, I think in GP 2018 or maybe 16 R2 is a connection to the Power BI cloud from Microsoft. And so the last thing is, I'll just put the slide over here since it's about the last one, is to talk about the intelligent edge. And so in 2018 R2, you will see a new option on your home page. So right up here where it says SA's Home is the Intelligent Cloud Insights. And so this is actually a connection from your GP system to the Microsoft Business Central Cloud. And so what this does, and you don't have to turn this on, obviously, but if I click on that, you'll notice that Dynamics 365 Business Central actually launches within my GP homepage space, and this is my the reason they call it the Intelligent Edge or the Intelligent Cloud here is because I'm actually syncing my data up to the Microsoft Cloud, up to the Business Central Cloud, and then using that data to do analytics. So business intelligence, artificial intelligence, machine learning, all those things that Microsoft is investing heavily in, they're providing to us here optionally to look at our data in a little different format. And so you'll see kind of this Intelligent Edge dashboard here, where it's actually looking at those KPIs, and this isn't anything I built. This is just demo data, but you obviously can, and this is obviously stuff we help you with, but you can create your own dashboards. And so this is yet another way to analyze your data using the insights that Microsoft has in Business Central. And so you know, my inventory, kind of a snapshot here, profitability and sales and so forth, cash numbers, and here's where the artificial intelligence comes in based on my settings here, is I have 10 of my customers that are late with their payments to you. And so, yes, I could run an aging, I could run a smart list, you know, I could easily extract that data out of my Dynamics GP system, but this is just a different kind of more a smarter way, really, a more intelligent way to look at what's under the hood. 13 invoices weren't paid by you on time, so I have 13 overdue invoices to vendors. They might be calling me. And so here's some things with, you know, looking at my profitability and my assets and balance sheet information and so on, and then taking the underlying debits and credits and actually looking at that in a visual representation. And so, you know, we've been looking at numbers on paper for many years, many centuries, some of us, and so, you know, that's still all available. But this way to analyze the data really allows us to get a snapshot of what's happening in the business and not have reports spread out all over our desk or conference table and so forth, trying to figure out, what's going on and what's working and not working and so forth. And so here you can see my data is kind of my sample data is not, in the best of shape to actually get a lot of good things out of this, but we do see that we have some capabilities here of using the Business Central Cloud plugged right into our GP system. And so this is brand new, I mean, literally brand new, a couple of weeks ago. And so we're hustling, trying to get up to speed on everything we can do with this intelligent cloud and how that plugs into GP and so forth. And so I suspect we'll be doing some webinars on what more we can do with this and how this works and what the, if there's any risk of exposing your data to the Microsoft cloud and so forth. And so stay tuned for all of that, but I at least wanted to make mention that this is out there. You might start to see some things come out in Microsoft marketing and newsletters and around the internet and so forth. And so you'll at least have an idea of what this looks like and how this is connected to your Dynamics GP data. You're obviously not seeing other people's data, but this is the beginning of using this artificial or machine learning type intelligence, even business intelligence, to actually better run your organization with the data that you have there on your own server. So, Caitlin, do we have any questions sitting out there? Or if anyone has questions, now's a good time to put those into the chat or the queue.
Yes, Brian, we did have a couple questions come in. The first one is there any determination right now on how Intelligent Cloud will be priced?
That's a good question. I just heard something at the GPUG Summit last week, and so today, this really is a kind of a core Business Central user that's required to make this connection, and those are $70 per named user, so per month. And so, if you had 10 people that wanted to use this intelligent cloud plugged into GP, it sounds like as of last week, that would be $70 for each named user per month. And so, this is 2 weeks old, and so there may be some other options coming, but as of right now, a few days ago, that was kind of the price.
Okay, and the other question we have right now is how long will Microsoft be providing support for 2018 R2?
Oh, 2018 R2, well, since it just released, I would expect we would see support running for 5 to 7 years. They, how they work this is they have a date that mainstream support ends, and that means that they're not going to do service packs or updates to the actual product. And so, for example, GP 2013 support ended a while back, and then it goes into what's called extended support. And extended support means that you can kind of call Microsoft and pay, and they will help you. If you end up calling Microsoft, of course, we don't, forget the versions. We still have people on really old versions that we support. It does limit our ability a little bit to get help if we have a question for Microsoft, but it will stay on mainstream support for 5 to 6 years time frame, maybe 7, and then it will go into extended support for a period of time. But typically we see, somewhere in that 7 to even 10 years of full support, including the mainstream and the extended. It could be, maybe 8 or something, but it's somewhere generally in that time frame before it is completely turned off and there's nobody to call anymore. Of course, you can always call us because, as I said, we don't forget the versions, and we have some people on Dynamics 5.0, believe it or not, that we're still, luckily they don't need a lot of support, but 5.0, that was more than 20 years ago, and so we can still help them. So.
All right. If there are no additional questions, I would like to thank you all for attending today's presentation. And thank you, Brian, for giving us a great overview on the new version of GP 2018 R2. If any later questions do come up, please, oh, actually, sorry, right as I was
Okay,
talking, I noticed another question.
sure.
Let's see. Can you use the mass update to an inactive group of vendors that are not in any order or range?
Yes, you could. You just have to go tick them off, check them off one by one, and they're on the list there. You just have to find them, put a check mark, and yes, you can do that.
Okay, perfect. Well, if any other later questions do come up, please feel free to reach out to either Brian or myself. You will be seeing a follow-up email from me later this afternoon with a link to the recording, so you can certainly respond to that if you would like to. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.
All right, thank you all. Thanks, Caitlin.